I never expected the phone to ring that night. It startled me so badly I almost spilled my tea. For years, my evenings had passed in silence, nothing more than the hum of crickets in the weeds and the creak of this old porch swing. But that call cut through the quiet like a siren. It was Michael, my only son, the boy I hadn't spoken to in years, sounding cheerful, almost too cheerful. He said he wanted me to come out to his home, that grand place of his, for dinner. He said it was time we put the past behind us. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. His voice carried that polished edge, the kind of tone you hear from men who've spent too much time chasing deals and shaking hands. It didn't sound like the boy who once followed me around with dirty sneakers and sticky hands. Still, I listened. I listened because a father can't stop listening, not even after years of silence. I sat there on the porch, the phone cooling in my palm, my heart thudding harder than it should have for a man my age. The crickets were still singing, but I couldn't hear them anymore. All I could hear was Michael's invitation echoing, "Come for dinner, Dad." Let's make things right. I'm 68 now. The years don't slip past quietly anymore. They stomp by heavy, leaving aches in my knees and a stiffness in my hands. The old house shows its years too. Paint peeling off the siding weeds, tugging at the corners of the fence steps, groaning under my weight every time I walk inside. It's not much, but it's mine. My wife Linda and I built our lives here. After she passed, this porch became my refuge, the one place I could sit with a mug of tea and pretend she was still beside me humming some hymn she loved from church. Michael hasn't been back here since the funeral. He came stiff in a dark suit, said the right words, and then he was gone. After that, it was only calls when he needed money. Always an idea, always a new business that just needed a little push. I gave what I could until I realized I was only feeding a hunger that never filled. When I finally said no, he stormed off, cut me out of his life, and left me to wonder where I went wrong as a father. And now, out of the blue, he wants dinner. I leaned back in the swing, let it creak under me, and stared into the dark yard. Fireflies blinked lazily over the grass. I thought of the boy who once chased them with a jar, running barefoot until Linda called him inside. Where had that boy gone? How had he become the man with the expensive suits and the cold eyes? I wanted to believe the call was genuine. I wanted to think Michael missed me, that he had finally grown tired of chasing after empty success, but my gut told me something else. It wasn't the words he'd said, all the right ones. It was the way he'd said them, smooth as glass, not a crack of real warmth. When you've lived long enough, you learn to trust the silences more than the words, and in his silence, I heard calculation. Still, loneliness is a persuasive companion. It whispers that maybe you're wrong, maybe you should give people another chance. And so I sat there, torn between suspicion and hope, feeling like an old fool for even considering it. The tea cooled in my cup. Across the street, the Johnsons' porch light flicked off. Another reminder of how this neighborhood had changed. Families moved out. New ones moved in, most of them young and too busy to wave at an old man. Only on Sundays at church potlucks did I find a slice of community again. They'd ask me how I was managing, and I'd smile, say I was fine. But inside, I carried the heavy truth of being left behind by my own flesh and blood. Now here was Michael promising reconciliation. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to be a father again, not just a lonely widower with nothing but memories for company. But the doubts wouldn't let go. I remembered the last time he came asking for money. He stood in this very yard, his car idling at the curb, dressed like he had already made it big. He wanted $10,000 to buy into some tech venture. When I refused, he spat words that cut deeper than any knife. "You'll die with your pockets full and your heart empty." Then he drove away. That was the last I saw of him. I don't know how long I sat on that porch after the call. The night grew cooler and the swing swayed under me like a cradle. I thought of Linda again, of how she used to warn me that Michael's hunger for success would swallow him whole. She'd beg me to stand firm, not to give in every time he asked for money. She said love wasn't about giving everything away, it was about teaching your child to stand. I had tried, God knows I had tried, but Michael had chosen another path. And yet even now, with her gone and my heart hardened, I couldn't erase the longing to see him again. To hear him call me Dad without anger in his voice. When I finally stood, my knees cracked like old wood. I carried the mug inside, set it on the sink, and looked around the kitchen. The walls still held the faint scent of Linda's cooking roast chicken apple pie. I could almost hear her voice telling me not to be so stubborn, not to let pride get in the way of family. Maybe she was right. Maybe this dinner was a chance, however slim, to rebuild something broken. But another voice whispered in the back of my mind, darker and sharper. Be careful. You know him better than anyone. And you know when he wants something, he'll stop at nothing to get it. The phone sat on the counter screen, still glowing faintly from the missed call notification. I stared at it, torn. A part of me wanted to pick it up and cancel to protect myself from disappointment. Another part urged me to go to test Michael's words to see if forgiveness was still possible. I knew one thing for certain: if I went, I had to go with my eyes open. No more blind trust. The swing on the porch creaked again as the night wind brushed past. I stepped outside, let the cool air settle my nerves, and looked up at the stars. They scattered across the sky, distant and indifferent, like the years that had passed between us. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow I would drive that old pickup into Michael's world of manicured lawns and gated streets. Tomorrow I would find out if his invitation was real or just another trick in a long line of disappointments. For now, I sat back down the wood, pressing against my shoulders, the night heavy around me. The crickets sang. The fireflies blinked, and I whispered into the dark. Linda, if you can hear me, give me the strength to face whatever comes. I set out the next evening in my old pickup, the one that rattled whenever I pushed past 40. The road into Michael's neighborhood was smooth and newly paved, lined with perfect rows of maples that had been planted by the homeowners association. The lawns were cut sharp as carpets, and the houses stood like silent monuments to money. My truck felt like an intruder among the polished SUVs and shiny sedans parked in the driveways. As I drove through the gates, I remembered the first house Linda and I bought together. It was nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom on the edge of the town, a patch of grass out back where Michael learned to ride his bike. We planted tomatoes and marigolds along the fence. It was modest, but it was ours. Now I was steering into a world where everything gleamed, but nothing felt alive. Michael's mansion rose at the end of a cul-de-sac, its brick front lit up like a stage set. The windows glowed golden, every line sharp and deliberate, as if the house itself was posing for a photograph. I pulled up the drive gravel, crunching under tires that had long ago lost their shine. For a moment, I sat in the cab staring at that wide double door, wondering if I should turn back. But hope, stubborn as old roots, pushed me forward. I climbed out, my knees protesting. The night air carried the faint smell of mulch and fresh paint, as if even the earth here had been manicured. I straightened my jacket and pressed the doorbell. The chime inside was soft, expensive sounding. The door swung open, and there she was, Sophia. Tall, composed, wrapped in a silk blouse that caught the light. Her smile was polite, nothing more. Her eyes moved over me the way you might size up a worn piece of furniture still standing but past its prime. Robert, she said, her voice warm on the surface but cool underneath. We're so glad you came. I forced a smile, nodded. Thank you for having me. She stepped aside, and I crossed the threshold into a house that could have fit my own 2 times over. The foyer stretched upward, chandelier blazing. Marble tile gleamed beneath my shoes, and somewhere deeper in the house came the faint clink of glasses. Michael appeared, arms spread, grinning wide. He looked the part of a man who had conquered the world-tailored suit, gold watch, glinting hair slicked just so. Yet there was a restlessness in his eyes, a twitch at the corner of his mouth. Dad, he said, pulling me into a hug that felt rehearsed. You made it. I patted his back lightly. Wouldn't miss it. The words tasted strange. Sophia guided me into the living room, where everything was white and spotless, couches that looked too pristine to sit on glass tables that reflected the chandelier light. A bottle of wine stood uncorked on the counter, breathing like a creature waiting to be poured. Can I get you a glass? She asked. Tea, if you have it, I said, my throat dry. Her brows lifted for a second, just a flicker, before she nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. Michael sank into one of the couches, motioned for me to take the seat across. He leaned forward and elbows on knees, like a salesman about to launch into a pitch. Dad, I know it's been a long time. I've made mistakes. I should have called sooner. I nodded, watching him carefully. His words were right, but his tone carried that same polish, too smooth to hold weight. Before I could answer, a movement caught my eye near the hallway. A woman, short, dark-haired, slipped past with a laundry basket. She glanced up briefly, her eyes sharp and alert. Not the vacant look of someone lost in chores, but the watchfulness of someone who noticed everything. She gave a slight nod before disappearing into the kitchen. "Who was that?" I asked. Our housekeeper, Maria Michael, said lightly. "She's been with us a few months. Quiet, reliable." I let the name settle. Something in her gaze lingered with me, though I couldn't say why. Sophia returned with a delicate china cup, steam rising from the tea. She set it in front of me, her smile smooth as the marble floor. "Chamomile. Hope that works for you." "Perfect," I said, though it wasn't what I usually drank. Michael leaned back, clasping his hands. "We've got dinner set up on the patio. It's a beautiful night. Thought we'd enjoy the view." I followed them through glass doors to the backyard where lanterns hung along the railing, and a long table waited, dressed with silverware that gleamed under the lights. Beyond the yard stretched a manicured lawn that melted into darkness. It was a fine show, all of it. Too fine. We sat and dishes began to appear, brought by Maria: salad, roasted chicken bowls of vegetables dusted with herbs. She moved quietly. But again I caught her eyes. There was something there as though she wanted to say more than her duties allowed. Michael poured himself a glass of wine, swirled it, and raised it in my direction, to second chances. I lifted my teacup, the porcelain warm against my fingers. "To honesty," I said. His smile faltered for the briefest moment before he nodded and drank. As we began the meal, Sophia filled the silence with easy conversation. She asked about my health, about whether I was keeping up with church. She mentioned how the Homeowners Association had strict rules: lawns trimmed, fences painted, no cars parked overnight on the street. She laughed softly, saying it kept the neighborhood presentable. I listened, answering politely, though the mention of rules made me glance around. Everything in this place was about appearance, about keeping up a facade. Even the food felt like decoration, each plate arranged too carefully. At one point, I glanced back toward the house. On the sideboard near the kitchen door lay a stack of papers neatly clipped. From where I sat, I could see the crisp edges, the weight of official forms. Something in my gut twisted. Michael kept talking, spinning tales of business deals and investments of partners overseas, of how he was building something for the future. His words rolled out like a presentation, each one chosen, polished, gleaming. I nodded, when appropriate, sipped my tea and forced myself to breathe evenly. But my eyes kept drifting to that stack of papers waiting in the shadows. Sophia noticed. I saw the flicker in her gaze, the way she followed my line of sight. She leaned in, her smile sharp as glass. "Don't worry about work, Robert. Tonight is about family." She reached for the wine bottle, topped off Michael's glass, then set it closer to me. "You really should try it. It's a Bordeaux vintage. Michael insisted we open it for you." Her eyes held mine, steady and insistent. I wrapped my fingers tighter around the teacup. "This will do." The night air cooled, crickets starting their song in the manicured grass beyond the fence. The lanterns swayed slightly in the breeze, casting shifting shadows across the table. Michael leaned back, stretched an arm around Sophia's chair, and gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dad, I'm glad you're here. It means more than I can say." I forced myself to return the smile, though unease pressed heavy in my chest. Because I could feel it already, this wasn't just dinner. There was a plan here, hidden under the glow of lanterns and the taste of wine, and I was sitting in the middle of it. The first bite of roasted chicken nearly stuck in my throat. Not because of the food, it was seasoned perfectly tender as could be, but because of the way Michael kept watching me. His eyes lingered too long, sharp and calculating, as if he were measuring more than my appetite. Sophia played her part well, gliding in and out of conversation like a hostess trained for show. She complimented the church potlucks she claimed to miss attending, asked about neighbors she never knew, and laughed at Michael's stories on cue. On the surface, it could have passed for any family dinner. But I'd lived long enough to recognize a stage play when I was sitting in the front row. Michael cut into his meat chewing with exaggerated patience. You know, Dad, it's been good for me, stepping into the kind of circles I'm in now. Big deals, important people. I've learned how to make things work. He leaned back, swirling the wine in his glass. I want you to see that I'm not the same kid who came begging for loans. I forced a nod, though my grip tightened around the handle of my teacup. That's right, Sophia added smoothly. Michael has matured. He thinks about family now, about legacy. Her gaze flicked toward me, soft as velvet but hiding steel. It's time to make sure you're taken care of properly. The words slid across the table like oil on water. I let them pass without comment, focusing instead on the flicker of lantern light against the papers I'd seen earlier inside the house. Then it happened, a vibration in my pocket. Subtle, but enough to snap me out of my thoughts. I shifted slightly, slipped my hand under the tablecloth, and glanced down at the phone. A message glowed across the screen. Don't drink. Don't sign anything. Leave now. The words carved a chill straight through my spine. I set the phone face down, careful not to show a reaction. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my breathing even. Whoever sent that message knew something I didn't, and they were close enough to warn me. Michael raised his glass. Dad, I was thinking, why don't you spend more time here? The house is too big for just the two of us. You could have your own wing. Quiet. Comfortable. That's thoughtful, I said slowly, but I'm fine where I am. Sophia leaned forward, of her perfume a soft cloud across the table. Robert, you've carried too much burden alone since Linda passed. You deserve ease. Let us take care of the details, finances, property, all of it. You just relax and enjoy your time. Her hand brushed across the tablecloth, delicate fingers drumming near the stem of her wine glass. A signal subtle but deliberate. I sipped my tea, bitter in my mouth, though it wasn't meant to be. I managed fine. The meal stretched on, filled with stories from Michael's ventures, names of people I'd never met. Sums of money that made my stomach tighten. He spoke of investments that could double in months, of partners who saw him as indispensable. All the while, his voice carried the slick rhythm of someone convincing himself as much as anyone else. I let him talk. Sometimes the best defense is silence. But I noticed Maria. Each time she passed by with a dish or cleared a plate, her eyes brushed mine. Brief, cautious, but full of intent. She wanted to speak. She wanted me to know. Finally, as she set down a tray of rolls, her lips moved without sound. Be careful. A shiver ran through me. I broke a roll in half, pretending not to notice, but my mind clung to her warning. Michael laughed, suddenly loud and forced. Remember when I used to mow lawns to make money for baseball cards? I guess I should have stayed in landscaping, huh? He glanced at Sophia, then back at me. Well, times have changed. We need to think bigger now. His words landed heavy with implication. Sophia smiled, too polished. What Michael means is it's time to secure your future, and ours. Papers are just a formality. There it was, a slip but intentional enough to test the waters. I placed the roll back on my plate. Formality for what her eyes sparkled, but her smile didn't shift. We'll talk after dessert, no rush. The wind brushed across the patio, carrying the faint scent of cut grass. In the distance, a dog barked once, then fell silent. The world felt too still, as if holding its breath. I reached for my tea again, though my hands wanted to tremble. Whoever had sent that text had pierced through the mask of this evening. They'd put words to the unease I already felt. Michael tapped his glass against the table, sharp enough to cut through the silence. Dad, I want tonight to be different. I want us to be a family again. That means trust. That means letting go of old grudges. He leaned forward, his eyes drilling into mine. So when the time comes, I need you to say yes. The lantern light glinted against his watch as he gestured, his knuckles pale where the skin stretched tight. I held his gaze steady as I could. Trust has to be earned, Michael, not demanded. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Sophia's smile widened, but her eyes were cold. And in that fragile silence, Maria's voice echoed only in my memory. Be careful. I knew then that dinner was just the curtain raiser. The real play had yet to begin. The clatter of dishes in the kitchen gave me a reason to rise from the table. I muttered something about stretching my legs, pushing back my chair slowly so it didn't screech across the tile. Michael barely noticed. He was busy bragging about a deal in Chicago. Sophia glanced up, her eyes narrowing just slightly, but she let me go. I stepped into the kitchen, the scent of garlic and roasted herbs thick in the air. The counters gleamed under recessed lighting and pots hung from a polished rack like ornaments. Maria was there, wiping her hands on a towel, her back half turned toward me. She moved with the quiet precision of someone who had learned how to blend into the background, but tonight there was tension in her shoulders. When she turned, her gaze locked on mine, urgent and unflinching. She lowered her voice barely above a whisper. "You must not drink anything they offer you, and you must not sign," she said. Her accent was soft, lilting, but her words cut like a knife. My breath caught. "What are you talking about?" She glanced toward the dining room, then stepped closer, towel clenched tight in her hands. "They plan to put something in your drink. They want you to sign papers that give them control, power of attorney. They mean to take everything." For a moment the room tilted around me. The warmth of the kitchen air felt suddenly oppressive. I gripped the edge of the counter, steadying myself, my pulse thudding in my ears. I thought of Linda, her warnings, her insistence that we keep our savings safe, that we never let pride or guilt sway us into foolishness. Her voice echoed through memory, clear as if she were standing beside me now. "Don't let them take what we built." I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sand. "How do you know this?" Maria hesitated, then reached beneath her apron. From the pocket she pulled a small flash drive, silver and plain, dangling from a loop of string. She pressed it into my palm, quickly folding my fingers around it. "Everything is here," she whispered. "Emails, contracts, messages. They left the office computer open. I copied what I could. It shows the plan." The tiny device felt heavier than stone in my hand. I slipped it into my pocket, the weight of it pulling against my chest like a secret too dangerous to carry. Maria leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "I shouldn't be telling you, but I couldn't stay silent. I've seen this before in another family. They ruined the old man's life. I will not let it happen again." I stared at her words, failing me. Gratitude, fear, disbelief, all tangled inside me. "Why help me?" Her eyes softened. And for the first time that night I saw not just the housekeeper, but a woman carrying her own scars, because no one helped my father. And I swore I'd never watch it happen to someone else. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Maria straightened, lifted the towel again, and busied herself with a cutting board. Michael's voice carried in from the dining room, loud with false cheer. I forced myself to breathe, to smooth the lines of my face, and stepped back toward the doorway. Before I left, Maria murmured once more, so low I barely caught it. "Be careful. They're desperate." Back at the table, Sophia's smile greeted me like a mask. "Everything all right?" "Just needed a moment," I said, easing into my chair. Michael raised an eyebrow. "Dad, you look pale. Are you feeling okay?" I forced a thin smile. "It's just the heat in there. Reminded me I should take it easy." He chuckled, lifting his wine. "That's why you need us, Dad. To take the stress off your shoulders." The words slithered across the table, and I resisted the urge to recoil. As the meal wore on, I kept my hands steady on the teacup, though inside I was rattling like a storm window in the wind. My mind spun around the USB, burning a hole in my pocket. Evidence, proof. Something solid against the tide of charm and manipulation. I thought of Linda again. She would have told me to stand tall, to fight back, not with anger, but with wisdom. That was always her way, so I played along. I listened to Michael's endless monologues about opportunity, nodded when Sophia hinted at responsibility, and let them believe I was pliable. All the while, my thoughts moved toward one man I could trust, Thomas Klein. My attorney for years, a friend who had helped me navigate probate after Linda died. I pictured myself handing him that flash drive, pictured his calm, meticulous hands slotting it into his computer eyes, scanning the evidence. I pictured the shock on Michael's face when confronted with his own words, his own schemes. The thought steadied me. Dessert was brought out, an apple tart glazed to a shine. Sophia cut neat slices, sliding one onto my plate with a smile that showed just enough teeth. "Go on," she said. "It's our favorite." I picked up my fork, sliced a piece, but let it rest on my plate. Michael leaned in, watching. "Dad, it means a lot that you're here. Tonight is important. You'll see." I forced another smile, though unease churned in my stomach. Yes, tonight was important, but not for the reasons they thought. Later, when conversation lulled and lanterns flickered low, I slipped my phone from my pocket under the table. My thumb hovered over the screen. For a long moment I hesitated, the room spinning with voices and shadows. Then I opened my contacts and tapped Thomas Klein's number. I typed a message, short and discreet, nothing that would rouse suspicion if seen. Need to meet. Urgent. Bring discretion. I pressed send, the screen dimming as the message flew into the ether. I sat back, tea cooling in my hands, and let my face return to calm. Maria's warning still echoed inside me, sharp and unyielding. I knew now that the battle had begun and there was no turning back. Michael's voice carried through the dining room with a confidence that belonged on a stage. He rose from his chair and disappeared into the house. For a moment, his footsteps echoing against marble floors. When he returned, he wasn't holding dessert plates or wine. He was holding a sleek leather folder, the kind of thing an executive might carry into a boardroom. He set it down between us with a soft thud that sounded louder than it should have. My pulse picked up, and my hand twitched against the handle of my teacup. "It's nothing complicated, Dad," Michael said, easing back into his seat, the folder still resting on the tablecloth like a trap waiting to be sprung. "Just a little paperwork, a formality, something to make sure you're secure." I smiled faintly, buying time. At my age, security usually means a good lock on the door and neighbors who still remember your name. Michael chuckled, though there was no mirth in it. He slid the folder closer, his polished watch catching the lantern light. "This is about more than locks, Dad. This is about protecting what you've built, about legacy." The words scraped across me like sandpaper. Legacy. They had dressed it up in fine wrapping paper, but I knew what was underneath. Sophia leaned in her perfume, brushing the air between us. "Robert, you've carried this burden alone for too long. All the accounts, the house, the savings. Let Michael take some of that weight. That's what families do." Her hand brushed against the folder, fingers resting just above the clasp. A silent invitation. I reached for my glass, then hesitated. Not wine, never the wine, but the lukewarm tea I'd clung to all evening. I took a sip, the bitterness steadying me. "I appreciate the concern," I said, setting the cup down. "But I've been handling things fine. Bills get paid. Roof hasn't caved in. My tomatoes still grow in the garden." Michael's smile thinned. "Dad, come on. This isn't about tomatoes." "Maybe it should be," I replied evenly. "Tomatoes don't lie. You put in the work, you get the fruit. Not always perfect, but honest." His jaw tightened just for a second. He opened the folder, revealing a neat stack of papers with colored tabs marking where a signature should go. The air seemed to grow heavier. "Just sign here and here," he said, tapping the pages with a manicured finger. "It's just power of attorney, Dad. Nothing changes day to day. You live your life, enjoy your time. We handle the messy parts." Sophia's voice slid in like honey. "Think of it as insurance. Peace of mind." I leaned forward, squinting at the papers, pretending to study them. In truth, my eyes barely skimmed the words. My focus was on keeping my breath, even on remembering Maria's warning on the weight of the flash drive pressing against my pocket. "I should probably have Thomas take a look," I said casually, tracing a finger along the edge of the page. "You remember Thomas Klein, don't you? He's been with the family since Linda and I first drafted our will." The shift was instant. Michael's smile faltered and Sophia's eyes sharpened. "There's no need to drag lawyers into this," Michael said quickly. "This is just family business. Private." I lifted my gaze to his. "That's the thing about privacy. Sometimes it hides too much." Sophia refilled Michael's glass, then reached for mine, bottle tilting. I moved my hand to cover the rim of my cup. "Thank you, but I've got to take my heart medicine soon. Doctor says no mixing it with alcohol." Her lips curved, but her eyes were ice. "Of course. We wouldn't want to risk your health." Michael leaned closer, dropping the charm from his tone. "Dad, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You've done the hard work already. Let me take it from here. I'm not sure I understand," I said, voice mild. "Take what exactly responsibility?" He shot back a little too fast. His knuckles drummed against the table. The lanterns outside flickered with the breeze, casting shifting shadows across his face. I could see the boy he once was, buried beneath ambition and desperation. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. But then I remembered the text, Maria's whispered warning, and the way Linda's voice haunted me still. "Don't let them take what we built." So I sat back, folded my hands in my lap, and let silence fill the space. People show themselves when silence grows too heavy. Michael shifted, fidgeting with his cufflinks. If you really love me, Dad, you'll sign tonight. The words landed like a stone thrown across a still pond, ripples spreading in every direction. I let the silence stretch further long enough for him to squirm. Love doesn't demand conditions, Michael. It doesn't come with dotted lines. Sophia's smile dropped altogether now. Her fingers tapped the table in a steady rhythm, a drumbeat of irritation. Michael leaned forward again, voice low and sharp. Don't turn this into a fight. I'm offering you an easy path. You should take it. And if I don't, I asked, my voice calm but steady, every syllable deliberate. His eyes flashed just for a second. Then you're making a mistake you'll regret. The dog barked again, somewhere beyond the manicured lawn, a lonely sound swallowed by the night. I sat in the glow of lantern light, heart pounding but outwardly unshaken. I'll read through everything I said at last, drawing the folder a few inches closer, not opening it again. But I don't sign on the spot. Not anymore. Michael forced a laugh. Still stubborn as ever. Stubbornness keeps old porches standing, I answered. Sophia's chair scraped softly against the patio as she stood collecting plates. Her silence said more than her words ever could. Michael leaned back, hiding his frustration behind another sip of wine. His hands trembled slightly, just enough for me to notice, and in that tremor I saw the truth. This wasn't confidence. It was desperation wrapped in silk. The folder sat between us, patient, waiting. But so was I. The lanterns outside swayed in the breeze, casting restless shadows across Michael's face. The folder still sat between us, heavy with unspoken expectation. My tea had long gone cold, but I kept my hand wrapped around the cup as though it could anchor me. Michael drummed his fingers against the table, the sound sharp, impatient. Dad, this isn't complicated. You're making it complicated. All you have to do is sign and everything is settled. I leaned back slowly, forcing my shoulders to relax, though tension knotted every muscle. Settled for whom, I asked. His eyes narrowed. For everyone. For you. For me. For this family. I felt the words catch in my chest, the hollowness of them. Family. A word that should have carried warmth, not calculation. I set the cup down deliberately. This isn't about family. It isn't about love. This is about money. The silence after was sharp as broken glass. Sophia's mask slipped, then the poised hostess vanishing. Her lips pressed into a thin line and her eyes glittered with something closer to contempt than concern. Your stubbornness has ruined Michael's chances again and again. He could have been somebody if you had supported him instead of holding him back. Don't make it worse. I turned to her, steady as I could. Linda and I supported him every step we could, but no amount of money can fill a hole that has no bottom. Michael slammed his palm against the table. The silverware rattled. You think you're so righteous, sitting in that falling down house, clinging to scraps like they mean something. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. You never have. His voice cracked at the edges, fury colliding with fear. I stayed quiet, letting the silence hang heavy again. Inside, my heart raced, but I knew the less I gave, the more he would reveal. Sophia's hand touched Michael's arm, trying to steady him. Michael. Don't. He pulled away, pacing behind his chair, one hand pressed to his forehead. His veneer was unraveling thread by thread. You think I'm doing this for me, he snapped. You think I wanted to drag you into this. I didn't have a choice. Do you know what it's like to have collectors breathing down your neck? Men who don't care about excuses, who don't care about family, only about what you owe. Sophia froze, her eyes flashing toward him. He realized too late what he'd said. His face blanched, the weight of his slip hanging in the air. Debt collectors. The words landed like a hammer. I folded my hands together to keep them from shaking. So it wasn't just greed, it was desperation. Desperation fueled by debts he couldn't pay, debts that now drove him to strip his own father of everything. Maria entered then, carrying a tray with coffee cups. Her steps faltered when she saw the tension, but she set the tray down carefully, her eyes flicking to me. I caught the briefest nod, a silent reminder. Hold on. Michael rounded on her. What are you staring at? Get out. She lowered her gaze, murmured an apology, and slipped back inside. But her presence steadied me even in its briefness. I looked back at Michael. His chest heaved, sweat dampening the collar of his shirt. He looked less like a polished executive and more like the scared boy I once found hiding in the shed after breaking a neighbor's window. But this time the stakes weren't a broken pane of glass. "You could have come to me," I said quietly. "You could have told me the truth." He barked a laugh, bitter and sharp. "The truth? The truth is you'd rather watch me drown than lift a finger. You'd rather sit on your so-called principles while I get buried alive." I shook my head. "No, Michael. I'd rather see you stand on your own feet, but you never wanted to. You wanted shortcuts, easy wins. And now those shortcuts have led you here." His fists clenched. For a moment I thought he might strike the table again. Instead, he grabbed the folder, thrust it toward me. "Sign it," he shouted. "If you care at all, you'll sign." The word rang in the air, desperate, pleading, angry all at once. Sophia stood now, her calm facade gone completely. "Michael, stop it. You're making this worse. I'm trying to save us," he roared. "You think they'll just walk away if I don't pay? You think they'll wait? They're not patient people." Her face twisted. "And you think dragging your father into this is saving us? You'll destroy him, and then what? What will be left?" Their words crashed against each other, sharp, frantic. I sat between them, the storm circling around me. And yet even as their masks fell away, I felt oddly still. Because now the truth was spilling out without my pushing. Every secret they'd tried to hide under wine and polite smiles was laid bare. Michael turned back to me, eyes wild. "You don't understand, Dad. These people, they don't forgive. They don't forget. If I don't give them what they want, it's over." I drew a slow breath, steadying myself. "Then maybe it's time you face the consequences of your choices." His face contorted somewhere between rage and despair. "You'd really let them come for me? You'd really watch your son be torn apart?" I met his gaze. "Better that than letting you destroy everything your mother and I built." The silence that followed was raw, ragged, filled with the weight of things that could never be unsaid. Sophia collapsed into her chair, rubbing her temples. Michael stood rigid, chest-heaving, fists still tight around the folder. The lantern light cast hard lines across his face, making him look older, worn, and far more fragile than he wanted anyone to see. For the first time all evening, I saw him without polish or pretense. Not the successful man he tried to be. Not the dutiful son he pretended. Just a man cornered by his own mistakes. And I knew then his desperation wasn't just about money. It was about survival. But survival bought at the cost of a father's ruin was no survival at all. I let my hands rest on the table, palms open, calm. "You don't need my signature to fix this, Michael. You need to face it like a man, like the son I once believed you could be." His lips trembled, and for a flicker of a moment I thought I saw the boy again. But then the hardness returned, sealing over. "This isn't over," he muttered, a voice rough before sinking back into his chair. I looked at him, at Sophia's pale face, at the folder that lay between us like a weapon neither of us had touched, and though fear still coiled in my gut, a strange calm settled over me. Because the masks had broken. The truth was out. Now all I had to do was hold on long enough for help to arrive. The night air had grown thick, heavy with tension and the scent of the overwatered lawn. Michael stood across from me, shoulders tight, his breathing uneven. Sophia lingered nearby, arms crossed, her composure cracked. The folder still lay on the table, a silent monument to all the lies that had built this evening. A knock came at the door. 3 firm raps, steady as a judge's gavel. Michael flinched. His eyes darted toward Sophia, then back to me. "Who the hell is that?" I kept my voice calm, though my pulse hammered. "Probably the company you've been waiting for." Sophia's lips parted, her eyes flashing. Michael shoved back his chair, nearly tipping it. He stomped toward the door, muttering under his breath. When he opened it, 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, their presence filling the foyer. Behind them came Thomas Klein, briefcase in hand, his calm expression cutting through the chaos like a blade. Michael's voice shot up an octave. "What's going on here? You can't just barge in." Thomas adjusted his glasses, cool as a winter morning. "Actually, Michael, they can. There's probable cause, and I'm here to make sure Robert's rights are protected." I stayed seated, my hands steady on the table. My heart still raced, but relief coursed beneath the fear. Help had arrived. Michael turned on Sophia, fury radiating off him. "Did you call them? Was it you?" For a moment she said nothing, frozen in the lantern light. Then her face shifted, her mask finally shattered. She looked at Michael not with loyalty but with calculation. "Yes," she said, her voice flat. "I did." Michael staggered like she had struck him. What? Sophia lifted her chin, her voice growing sharper. I'm not going down with you. I warned you this was too dangerous. You dragged me into this, Michael, but I won't pay the price for your mistakes. The words sliced through him. He shook his head violently, his hand gripping the edge of the doorframe. You traitor. After everything you mean, after every lie, she shot back. You think I didn't see the contracts. The emails. You think I wanted to end up in debt to men who threatened to break kneecaps for a living. I married you, Michael, not your failures. Her words cracked the silence, leaving nothing but the sound of Michael's ragged breathing. Maria appeared in the doorway from the kitchen, hands clasped tight. She looked at me, then at the officers. I can testify, she said firmly. I've seen it all. The drugs, the forged papers, the plans. I kept records. Michael spun toward her, his face contorted with rage. Shut up. You don't know anything, but Maria didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her shoulders straight, her eyes unyielding. I know enough. I saw the emails. I copied them. I warned him, she said, nodding toward me, and I will stand in court and tell the truth. The room stilled. Michael's chest heaved, his fists clenched, but even he knew it was over. The officers moved in, one reaching for Michael's arm. He jerked back violently. You can't do this. You don't understand what's at stake. Michael Miller, the officer, said evenly, you're under arrest for attempted fraud and conspiracy. Michael thrashed once, then sagged, his energy draining as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. His face twisted, desperation boiling over into raw panic. This isn't over, he screamed, his voice hoarse. You think they'll stop with me? You think those debts just disappear because you put me in handcuffs? They'll come for you too, for all of us. The words echoed through the house, chilling me to the bone. The officers pulled him toward the door. His voice faded as they led him outside, still shouting, still spitting rage and fear. Silence settled, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and Sophia's uneven breathing. She sank into a chair, her face pale. Her hands shook as she reached for the wine glass, then stopped, setting it back down untouched. Thomas turned to me, his expression steady. You did the right thing, Robert. Tonight could have gone much worse. I nodded, though my throat felt too tight for words. Maria crossed the room, placing a tentative hand on my shoulder. You're safe now, she said softly. I covered her hand with mine, grateful beyond measure. But Michael's final words still echoed in my mind, a shadow I couldn't shake. Because even as the door closed behind him, I knew the storm wasn't finished. The debt he left behind was still out there, looming faceless, waiting. And it wasn't done with us yet. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and paper, the kind of scent that clung to places where lives were measured in documents and verdicts. I sat on the worn wooden bench beside Thomas Klein, my attorney of more than 20 years. His steady presence anchored me while my hands rubbed over one another, knuckles pale with the effort of staying composed. Ahead of us, through the double doors, lay the probate courtroom, an arena I had never imagined I would enter as anything other than a witness to some distant neighbor's affairs. Yet here I was, called not as a bystander, but as the man whose own son had tried to strip him of everything. The bailiff opened the doors and we were ushered in. The room was solemn, the walls lined with portraits of judges long gone. A large seal of the state hung above the bench, its weighty symbolism pressing down on everyone present. On the far side, Michael sat beside his attorney, a younger man with sharp eyes and an expensive suit. Michael looked thinner already, his face drawn, though his jaw remained locked in defiance. Sophia sat a few seats away, separated as if the very air between them had grown poisonous. She avoided Michael's gaze, clutching her handbag in her lap like a shield. I lowered myself into the chair opposite them, every creak of the wood echoing my age. The judge entered, robe-swishing, gavel striking once. The sound reverberated through my chest. The case was called In Re the Estate and Affairs of Robert Miller. My stomach twisted, hearing my own name spoken as though I were a subject of debate rather than a living man. Michael's attorney rose first, speaking with polished charm. Your Honor, what we have here is a case of concern for an elderly gentleman's well-being. My client, Michael Miller, was merely attempting to ensure that his father's financial affairs were handled responsibly given Mr. Miller's advancing age and potential cognitive decline. The words sliced deep, potential cognitive decline. He said it so casually as though my mind were an afterthought, a cracked tool no longer suited for its purpose. Thomas leaned in, whispering, "Stay calm. Let him overplay his hand." I clenched my jaw and stared straight ahead, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. The attorney continued painting Michael as a devoted son, a man burdened by the weight of protecting his aging father. He gestured toward me with a practiced hand. Surely the court must consider whether Mr. Miller is truly capable of managing his affairs without undue risk. Michael nodded beside him, eyes glinting. When Thomas rose, his voice was steady, measured. "Your Honor, this case is not about care or protection. It is about exploitation. We intend to show clear evidence that Michael Miller, with the assistance of his wife, sought to obtain power of attorney through deception, including attempts to incapacitate his father with drugs and forged documents." Gasps rippled softly among the few observers in the gallery. Michael shifted his foot, tapping furiously under the table. Witnesses were called. Sophia was first. She walked stiffly to the stand, her heels clicking like hammers. "Mrs. Miller, the judge said you understand you are under oath." "Yes, Your Honor." Her voice trembled, but she lifted her chin. Thomas approached. "Mrs. Miller, did you and your husband present documents to Robert Miller on the evening in question?" Her eyes darted to Michael, then away. "Yes." "Were those documents legitimate?" She swallowed hard. "No, they were not." A murmur swept the room. Michael's face turned red, his hand slamming once on the table before his attorney whispered frantically to him. Thomas pressed on. "Who prepared them, Michael?" she whispered. He insisted. Her words hung in the air like a confession carved in stone. Maria was called next. She walked to the stand with quiet dignity, her hands folded, her voice clear. "I worked in the Miller household for almost 2 years," she began. "I witnessed Sophia and Michael discussing their plan. They spoke of using medication to weaken Mr. Miller. I also found documents on the office computer. I copied them onto a USB drive." Thomas lifted the small device, holding it up for the court. "Your Honor, this contains emails, drafts of forged contracts, and records of financial dealings that directly implicate Michael Miller." The judge accepted it, passing it to the clerk. Michael lunged half out of his chair. "That's a lie. She stole that. None of it is true." The judge's gavel cracked. "Mr. Miller, you will remain seated or be removed." Michael sank back down, seething, his eyes wild. When it was my turn to take the stand, the room seemed smaller, tighter. Thomas guided me gently. "Mr. Miller," he began, "can you describe what happened on the evening in question?" I took a breath, steadying my voice. "My son invited me for dinner. He said he wanted to make peace, to be a family again. But during the meal I received a warning not to drink, not to sign. Later, Maria confirmed what I already feared, that they intended to drug me and force my signature. I saw the papers myself set before me like bait. "And did you consent to any of this?" Thomas asked. "No," I said firmly. "I never would. My wife and I worked our whole lives for what we have. It was never meant to be handed over under threats and lies." My words felt like both testimony and prayer. Michael's attorney tried to cross-examine, circling me like a vulture. "Mr. Miller, is it not true that you sometimes forget things that you repeated yourself in conversations? Might that not indicate decline?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I forget small things. A grocery list? A neighbor's birthday. But I do not forget who I am or what I stand for. I do not forget the difference between love and betrayal." The courtroom was silent. Even the attorney faltered before stepping back. By late afternoon, the evidence had piled too high. Sophia's testimony, Maria's courage, the damning files on the USB, one piece after another, nailed Michael's intentions into the record. Finally, Michael erupted, his composure shattering completely. He leapt to his feet, shouting, "This isn't over. You can't do this to me. You'll regret it, all of you. You think a courtroom changes anything. You think those debts vanish because of a gavel." The bailiff rushed forward, restraining him as his shouts echoed off the paneled walls. His voice cracked, equal parts rage and terror. The judge struck the gavel again. "Order. This court will recess until sentencing." I sat back down beside Thomas, my hands trembling, but not from weakness. From release. From knowing the truth had finally seen the light. Yet Michael's words still lingered, dark clouds on the horizon. "This isn't over. And I knew, even in victory, the shadows of his choices would follow us. Still, the courthouse steps felt heavier beneath my feet as I made my way down them. Thomas at my side, the summer air carried the distant sound of traffic and a church bell tolling somewhere across town. I had stood in front of many buildings in my life, church halls, factories, even the hardware store where I worked my younger years, but leaving that courtroom was unlike any other walk I'd ever taken. Behind me, the doors shut on Michael shouting. The judge's ruling had been clear guilty of fraud and conspiracy. The sentencing would come later, but the word guilty was already a verdict carved into the record of his life. Sophia had taken the stand against him and walked away with a lighter sentence. She had traded dignity for leniency, and in doing so she lost the one thing that cannot be restored: respect. I had seen the faces in the gallery the way neighbors whispered. Sophia might walk free, but she would never walk proud again. As Thomas clasped my hand at the base of the steps, he gave a short nod. "You did well, Robert. Better than most men could have." I returned the shake, my grip firmer than I expected. I didn't do it alone. You, Maria, even Sophia, in her way. They all brought the truth into the light. He smiled faintly. Sometimes that's all a man can ask for. Then he left the briefcase swinging at his side, and I was left standing in the sunlight, blinking at the weight of quiet that had settled over me. Life after the trial didn't leap back into routine right away. It came in slow steps, like learning to walk again after an injury. My old house creaked the same way it always had. The porch swing still groaned when I lowered myself into it each evening. But the silence had changed. It wasn't a silence filled with dread, with the ticking of a clock that counted down to some betrayal I couldn't yet see. It was the silence of peace. Neighbors began stopping by more often. Some brought casseroles, others just words. At Sunday service, I felt hands on my shoulders, pats on my back. One of the deacons pressed a folded note into my palm, signed by the pastor himself. "We're proud of you for standing tall." Even the local APS office, Adult Protective Services, sent a letter. They called me an example of courage for elders who faced exploitation. I read it twice, letting the words sink in. Courage wasn't something I had set out to prove. It was something I'd been forced to summon when my own flesh and blood left me no choice. Maria visited often. She never came empty-handed sometimes. A loaf of bread, sometimes a jar of pickles from the corner store, sometimes just her company. She carried stories of her grandchildren, her late husband, her years of cleaning houses in the neighborhood. We would sit together on the porch, two survivors in different ways. She never pressed me to talk, but when I did, she listened with the patience of someone who understood the weight of unspoken grief. One evening, as the cicadas sang their relentless song, she said, "You know, Robert, people talk about revenge like it's fire. They think it burns bright and consumes. But sometimes revenge looks like sitting here free with your own porch beneath you, while those who wronged you face the consequences they wrote for themselves." I nodded, the truth of it settling deep. Revenge wasn't about fury. It was about standing upright when others expected you to fall. Yet the story wasn't without its shadows. Michael had sent a letter from the county jail. The envelope bore his name scrawled in the familiar handwriting that once signed birthday cards and report cards. I left it unopened for 2 days, sitting on the kitchen table beside the salt shaker. Finally, one night I broke the seal. Inside, the words staggered across the page. Apologies, excuses, confessions of fear. He wrote about the debts, the men who pressed him, the panic that pushed him into betraying his own father. At the end, he scrawled, "I am sorry. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know I was wrong." I folded the letter carefully and slid it into the drawer with Linda's old recipes. I did not forgive him for his sake. Forgiveness, I realized, was not about setting him free. It was about setting myself free. Carrying hatred would only chain me to the same mistakes. Sunday came again, and with it the rhythm of community life. After service, we gathered in the fellowship hall for potluck. Tables groaned under the weight of casseroles, pies, and fried chicken. I carried a plate, greeting folks I hadn't spoken to in years. One neighbor leaned in, whispering, "Took guts to stand up to your own son." Most men wouldn't have had the strength. I only smiled, though inside I thought it wasn't guts. It was necessity. When survival and dignity are on the line, even the quietest man learns how to roar. As summer stretched on, the fear that had haunted me for months began to fade. The shadows of Michael's debts still lingered, but I had chosen not to let them dictate my life. Thomas assured me the authorities were watching, and Maria reminded me daily that living in fear was just another prison. So I chose freedom. Freedom looked like planting new tomatoes in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, with the sun on my back. It looked like repairing the squeaky porch swing instead of letting it decay. It looked like inviting Maria to join me for supper, 2 bowls of soup on the table instead of 1. When night fell, I would sit alone with Linda's memory. Sometimes I'd speak aloud, sometimes only in thought. We made it. "Linda," I whispered once, gazing at the stars. They tried to take it all, but we held on. Not just the house or the savings, but our dignity, and that my love is worth more than any account in the bank. The crickets answered their song, filling the spaces my wife once filled with laughter. Michael's voice still echoed, sometimes raw, with fury, shouting, "This isn't over." Maybe he was right in a way. Life rarely wraps up neatly. But I no longer feared the echo, because in the quiet of my porch, with neighbors' voices drifting across the yards and Maria's laughter rising from the kitchen, I understood that victory doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes victory is quiet. Sometimes it's simply surviving with your soul intact while those who betrayed you face the emptiness of their own making. And that quiet, steady triumph is the kind of revenge that lingers the longest. The cemetery lay at the edge of the town, just past the 2-lane road where the traffic light always blinked yellow after dark. I had driven that road countless times, but the turn into the cemetery felt different today, heavier, as if the tires of my old pickup carried not just me, but years of sorrow and survival. Maria sat beside me quiet, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She hadn't asked why I wanted to come here. She just knew. When we stepped out, the gravel crunched underfoot. The late afternoon sun slanted low, casting long shadows across the rows of headstones. The air carried that stillness cemeteries always seem to hold, where every sound is hushed, every breath softened out of respect for the dead. Linda's grave wasn't far from the entrance. I had chosen the spot years ago because of the oak tree nearby, its branches spreading wide like protective arms. I carried a single rose in my hand. Maria walked a few paces behind, giving me space, though her presence felt steady, like a quiet guard at my back. I stopped in front of the stone. Her name, still sharp in the engraving, met me with the same sting it had the day we buried her. I traced the letters with my fingertips, the cool granite grounding me. "I'm still here," I whispered. I made it through. For a long moment I simply stood there, listening to the rustle of the oak leaves and the faint chirp of a bird. Memories rose uninvited, Linda's laughter in the kitchen, when I came in with muddy boots, the way she always tucked a folded grocery list into my pocket, her hand resting on mine when Michael was born. All of it lived in me like fresh paint that hadn't dried no matter how many years passed. I set the rose down gently at the base of the stone. The red petals looked almost defiant against the gray. "Revenge isn't about destroying him," I said softly, though the words were for her as much as for myself. "It's about keeping my dignity and moving on." The air carried my words away, but I believe they lingered, caught in the oak branches above, resting with her. Maria came closer then, laying her hand on my arm. "She would be proud of you," she said, her voice low but sure. I swallowed hard. "I hope so. I hope she knows I didn't let him take everything." "You didn't just hold on," Maria replied. "You stood tall, and that matters more than people think." I looked at her at the lines etched into her face from years of work and worry and saw the truth in her eyes. She had stood tall in her own ways, through her own storms. That was what bound us together. 2 people who had learned that dignity was the last thing you could let slip away. We sat for a while on the bench by the oak tree, watching the light shift. The cemetery wasn't lonely the way it used to feel. It felt like a place where truths settled, where the noise of the world fell away and only what mattered remained. I told Linda things I hadn't said before, how scared I had been in Michael's house, how betrayed I felt, how heavy it was to face my own son across a courtroom. Maria listened quietly, never interrupting. And when I finished, I felt lighter, as if setting the words free let me breathe deeper than I had in years. The shadows stretched longer and the air cooled. Maria touched my shoulder. "It's getting late." I nodded, rising slowly. My knees protested, but I steadied myself. Just one more minute. I turned back to the headstone, the rose resting there. Linda, I'll carry you with me. Always. But I'm ready now. Ready to step forward. I didn't promise forgiveness for Michael. That wasn't mine to give on his terms. I didn't promise to forget either. But I promised to live. And that I knew was enough. We walked back toward the truck, the gravel crunching once more under our shoes. The horizon glowed with the golden light that only comes at day's end, washing over the town, the fields, and the small cemetery behind us. I glanced at Maria, who offered me a faint smile. "You're free now, Robert," she said. "That's what matters." I nodded, feeling the truth of it deep in my chest. Free from the weight of betrayal, free from the need to prove anything more. As we pulled out of the cemetery, the oak tree stood behind us, silhouetted against the setting sun. I thought of Linda resting there, and of the life that still stretched ahead for me. Revenge, I realized, had never been about punishing Michael. It had been about refusing to let him rewrite who I was. And in that, I had already won. The road home lay open, bathed in the last light of day. I pressed the gas, gently moving forward into whatever weighted my dignity and tacked my heart a little lighter. From Robert's story, we can draw lessons that reach far beyond one man's struggle. It reminds us that dignity is the most valuable possession we have, more than money or property. When betrayal comes from those closest to us, the pain cuts deeper, yet standing firm in truth becomes even more necessary. We learn that forgiveness is not about excusing the wrongdoer, but about freeing our own hearts from bitterness. Justice may come through the courts, through community, or simply through the strength to endure with honor. The story also shows the quiet power of allies. People like Maria, who step forward with courage when it matters most. Above all, Robert's journey teaches that revenge is not destruction, but resilience. The ability to keep walking with head held high even after life's harshest blows. In that quiet endurance, we find both freedom and peace. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box to the right.